Okay. And great. Okay, we are live. Awesome. Well, welcome to the second internationalization working group meeting of the year. We're sort of spinning things back up. There's a lot of background noise. If you wouldn't mind muting, unless you're talking, that'd be super great. Let me hold on just a second. Yeah, but really happy to have y'all and thankful that y'all are here. We have a lot to discuss about localization today and how we can support each other mutually. And there's other things on the agenda if we'd like to discuss those in earnest. The people who primarily represent more of the globalization side of things. Oh, thanks, Alejandro, appreciate it. So Stephen Loomis is usually here. He's not here with us today, so we might be touching light on globalization. And we do have Nick with us, who is definitely interested in the internationalization side of things. So setting that up for our setting up our localized information to our deploy targets and stuff like that. So we're definitely interested in that. We can talk a little bit about that. However, Zeke is not here today, but will be with us next week, as he said. So we might be able to get more of a perspective on how we got here from him and other folks to discuss in earnest then. But let's get into localization. We have both Alejandro and Tiago here today, which is great. And I am going to jump into the minutes. I will post the minutes link here in the chat for y'all in case you don't have it yet. Here it is. There we go. And then if we look down at the agenda, looks like I need to get that link in there real quick for us here. So let me grab that real quick and post it into the agenda here so y'all can have it. Okay, localization best practices. So if we, this is the agenda today. If we spin down to the minutes, if anyone would like to take notes today, that would be super great. No pressure though. So let's roll through agenda topic number 1. Which is localization best practices. And this touches into some things that Alejandro and myself have been briefly chatting over after a Twitter push a couple days ago for internationalization and getting excitement in that. And he had a big response with people wanting to help out with Spanish. But as we're spinning this back up, there's kind of 3 tiers to the internationalization working group, and one is translation, and that's what we're doing over in Crowden, in the Crowden service, and another is taking those translations and deploying them into our targets, like our documentation, our website, things like that. And then the other is internationalization within Node itself, globalization, the IMTL object. That kind of thing. But Alejandro and myself were talking the other day, and we thought that this might be a great opportunity to discuss how we can create a better collaboration between internationalization and localization working groups. So part of that is this issue that I just spun up, Internationalization and Localization Team Collaboration Best Practices Guide. That was sort of my first thought, was maybe we can start creating a guide around this to be able to give people a landing spot to funnel into where they need to be and which team and that sort of thing. But Alejandro, can you kind of give us an update on how things are going with Spanish and what's going on your side of things? What do you think about where localization is at today, and how can a group like this help that be successful? What are we not doing, and how can we help you, and how can we sort of streamline some things to help you more?
Sure. So there are a couple of things that I came across. There are documents and contribution guides that are not up to date. as I mentioned the other day, it wasn't clear that crowding was the tool of choice up until now. And yeah, I would really like some help moving that forward, getting that on at least on a guideline. Um, and maybe a few screenshots on how to get into crowding as well. That would be a super helpful idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's something that our group is definitely in the purview of our group, and something that we should do is, I think, just taking a step back, we need to create a proper funnel that's documented for how to get people into using Crowdin, and what they can do, and all that kind of stuff. So maybe maybe next steps before you reach out to the people who are interested in Spanish, or I mean, like, obviously other people, we can try to help get them through this, but maybe you're blocked really because there's not like a process around that yet, which is what I'm gathering. So like the next steps are to create like a, how do you use Crowdin? How do you, just like a getting started guide for how to use Crowdin for translating for Node. Would that be the most helpful thing that's next up?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then how do you feel like over time, like what is the best way to maintain like a good relationship between the Spanish working group and oh shoot, it's read only. Like I'd like to, maybe you can chime in on the issue that I posted here in a little bit, but I'd like to identify some of the areas that we can support working translation working groups better over time. So how do we, what kind of questions do we need to ask periodically to check in to make sure things are okay? And like what kind of touch points do we need to have to make sure that someone like yourself, who's kind of a champion, who's like a champion in the Spanish localization team and that sort of thing. How do we, I guess I'd like to identify what touch points we need to, and what questions we need to ask over time to make sure that people are empowered and doing what, getting out of it what they want to get.
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. I would say I would suggest a couple of checkpoints on whether the progress that is being made is pushed into somewhere. So I went into crowding and realized there are a couple of guides and documentation APIs that are at 100%, but you cannot actually access those anywhere at the moment.
Right.
And it wasn't clear for me initially if that was because of a pending change on the localization group, or if it's something still missing on the website itself today.
Right. And so there's kind of this unclear, sorry, I just have to send a message here real quick. Just made it, sorry, I can just say it out loud. You have editing privileges on the document. Sorry about that. Thanks for pointing that out, Nick. Apologies. So yes, there's no clear directive, or there's no clear, like, how does this go from being translated to being on the website, right? And I know that that's sort of representative of the fragmentation of the current state of this working group, since we kind of spun it up, and then there wasn't a lot of activity for a year and a half or so, or a year maybe, something like that. And so we're at the point to where we are regrouping and picking up the pieces of how we deploy to those targets, like Node.js.dev and the API docs and stuff like that, on Node.js.org. Oh, okay, no problem, man. But so I feel like that's sort of that's just in the nature of the team right now. And as we get more involvement, with people like Zeke and Nick and, other folks. I know, I think it's Alexander has really been trying to push that forward as well, and he's blocked, and we need to help him with that as soon as possible. But that's just sort of the nature of the team right now. So I think thinking on that in a broad spectrum, though, of like what is useful, what's useful for translators at that point. Maybe as we spin up like a user guide or that sort of thing, we can tag it at the bottom with like, hey, as these translations are actually, oh, he's gone. I'll just say, as the translations are coming through, it would be cool to have a tagline at the bottom of a contributing guide saying like, here, check out where your translations are deployed or whatever. So
that was something actually added to the website recently. There actually is a thanking contributors.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there's a thing in the footer now that it just randomly grabs a contributor and it on page load lazy loads it. I think it's live. I haven't checked.
Oh, that's awesome.
The PR landed.
Oh, rad. Great. Yeah, perfect. That's another way to see like how things, so like in that sense, it might be interesting with localization though, because there's a level of abstraction. It's like the PRs are going into these things, like via internationalization, like the internationalization pipeline. So they're not like, I'm not sure if they're gonna, like if individual contributors, unless, yeah, I'll have to think. That's just another problem to get the localization contributors' names on those PRs that are coming through, via and stuff. I think that'll be an interesting one that we should figure out, because we want people to, be recognized for their work as well. But Alejandro, all we were talking about was that we'd like to get, two things, like maybe at the footer of the contributing guide, we can have a place where people can see, have links to see where their localization is going live. And then on the deployment side, having, getting their, info readily, info there as well. So like being able to recognize the contributors somehow, even though we're doing it through like, bots and CI/CD and stuff like that, we're going to have to, we'd like to figure out how to get credit to the localization teams and stuff. But
yeah, fine for me. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any general thoughts on this topic of relationship between localization groups and or teams and this group? And I think we've talked about some of the basic stuff that we need to do, obviously, but what are your all's thoughts, and is there any other points of discussion within that scope that you'd like to bring up or discuss?
Are there currently separate teams for the localizations? So
yeah.
like Portuguese versus the Portuguese Brazilian?
Right, exactly.
Idea, or?
Yeah, so this is another interesting topic. Let me grab this link for y'all. If I can find it. There is here it is. Okay. Post this in the chat. So forget whatever I said just made. That doesn't make any sense. That was from an earlier comment. So here is a list of our localization teams at the moment. And I think in addition to having documented support for localization teams, internationalization working group needs documented support for just exactly what you're asking, Nick, like how do we identify who's the champion for which group, and how do we funnel these people to to the right people, the right team, that sort of stuff. So I think having both of those concerns addressed would be extremely helpful, because for example, Alejandro and I just did this blast on Twitter, and now we have a bunch of interest, and now it's up to us to be able to help them, just saying, hey, file an issue and say you're interested is great, but we should be able to hit them with a contributing URL that helps them know how we're interested in working with them, and they're interested in working with us. So this is just part of that that thing. But here with this list of localization groups, I think like next steps within the action items that we discussed last week, part of that is going to be touching base, with each of these groups and seeing like, kind of like we did, or I did a couple years ago, when we were switching over to sort of a new model, just saying like, hey, this is what we're, kind of the direction it seems like things are moving. Let's, if you have any, if you have, or this is the direction we'd like to move. If you have any thoughts about this, please speak up. We'd like to hear about what's going on, that sort of stuff. I think we need another sort of touch base again to see, who's interested and who can help champion, per group, or who's interested in helping be the point person, if you will, so that when we do these blasts, we can give them to, or get them in touch with those individuals. But this is the general topology of our localization teams as they currently stand. I think we need.
I was actually thinking those as the internationalization teams. I didn't realize those were considered the localization ones. Because something like Norwegian, there's just one, but for localization, I think of more the English Canadian type thing versus English. Like the English or Spanish would be the internationalization group, but there might be locale specific teams. I didn't realize they were all considered the localization teams.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I may be throwing verbiage around here that crosses over definition, but I think what what I'm talking about here is just translation, and we're calling the translation localization within these various teams. So these are the people who would be interested in translating textual assets of Node.js, within Crowdin, and that sort of thing. But as far as like I think there's a lot of legwork that we need to we could almost have another working group meeting here soon, between Nick, between you and me and Stephen and Zeke, probably, and discuss more in depth, like globalization and how we can funnel and help for that sort of thing as well. But I think primarily these represent the people who are interested in like translating content. And does that sound correct, Alejandro, to you, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to mention a couple of things. Hearing from other teams would actually be very helpful for us. As a simple example, to say, for example, communicate within all the team members for the Spanish translation working group or team. I'm still not sure what would be the best channel. Say, for example, the OpenJS Slack. If they are using something else, if they are using still Gitter or any other tool, that would be also helpful, because there were a lot of people reaching out, and it's very hard to keep them to keep track of all through Twitter. One other question I was going to ask. So yes, you mentioned action items. That would be my end goal, for people to reach out and have a list of action items they can go read, maybe a document, and then as soon as possible, like start contributing in some way, either translating or helping other review their translation as well. That would be, yeah, ideally. I forgot the question that I was going to ask to you. Yeah, and if there are other teams that are, I know there are a lot of them that are really active. If they are doing things in some way, that would be very helpful from hearing on what they are doing currently, how they are managing these things. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think something that there's no yeah, there's no groundwork for maintainer guidelines, I suppose. Hey, Alexander, nice to see you. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. So Alejandro, yeah, there's no, I don't think there's any maintainer guidelines. Like we don't have enough definition or established definition yet for the internationalization working group or for localization teams, to know, like, I don't think we've arrived at we have a level of abstraction for like the pipeline and how things should work. And those are still, not fully implemented. But we also, need to really define, how best practices for how we can stay in touch, and how maintainers of localization working groups can kind of support each other. And that, I mean, that brings up a great point with the Slack channel and things like that. I mean, I definitely, I'll have to, through my position within the community committee, I'll be able to, bring that conversation up through the community committee, saying like, hey, within the OpenJS Slack, maybe we can have a, can we have channels for each localization working group? Because that would be super helpful, and a great way to get people collaborating in closer proximity. Rather than sort of just one-off issues and things like that. So Slack channel definitely sounds good, or figuring out like a central place for communication. And I've been thinking about spinning up one for this group there as well. So let's get our communications in order, and then we can, we might see a higher frequency of communication that way. But I think that, along with, like, as you said, that having some kind of guide, for localization teams, especially for maintainers, would be good. But so let me ask you this, Alejandro, in your sort of point of view, have you identified people who feel responsible as like champions for the group? Like, are you championing that group? Like, what does that look like for you right now?
There were people interested in helping out. I know there's a few contributors like Adrian and Alex Ramirez, who volunteered as well. So that would be really helpful. They couldn't make it today, but they were interested in helping facilitate these things as well. From my point of view, it would be great if I could lay down the groundwork and facilitate all the people that have reached out, and maybe wrote some guidelines and help them to stay in touch and have a tool, say, for example, to not have the same people translating the same document at the same time, as an example. And yeah, hopefully the pending work, or the part of the documentation that is not yet translated, is not that much, at least for Spanish. So the rest of the work, I would say, would be maintaining what is currently there.
Yeah, absolutely. And as long as things are getting deployed, and we're seeing those updates actually going live, it's all worth it and exciting. And that's the thing. It's like there's just we're adopting a new platform with Crowdin, and so having that guideline for how to use it and how to get started as a translator is obviously a must. So I guess like the patterns that I'm thinking about around supporting localization, or supporting folks like yourself who are gathering with other maintainers for localization groups, is helping them helping them know how to like where to look for those things in Crowdin, because like you can see, I mean, like if you're using it, you can see like, oh, 19% of this document has been translated or whatnot. And there's like other really handy there's other really handy viz there that you can reference while you're working. But yeah, I think okay, yeah, that definitely gives us some action items as far as like, here are the 4 or 5 things that would be super helpful for localization group maintainers to know about, or people who are coming in to want to translate. And I think just knowing how to use Crowd and how that works with our setup is going to be exactly what we need next for that. Did anybody have any other thoughts on this conversation before we move on to the next agenda item?
I missed I think most of the discussion, but most part half part of discussion. But yeah, I think firstly we need to think and configure our process, and just then start thinking about how we write our guides and other things. Because for now, I am not 100% sure how it should be and how it will be, and I'm not sure that someone else know how it will be. And in that case, I think nobody can write some guide or some documentation about that. So it's like a logic.
Yeah.
I think for the first point, we need to configure everything and then move forward with this point. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, Alexander. And I also just wanted to thank you so much for your continued pushing and your continued interest in trying to help and that sort of thing. Thank you for keeping the issues going and all that sort of thing. Something we talked about in earnest last week was trying to, because we're sort of just picking up with that again. It's been about like a year since the project has been active. And so that's, yeah, you're right. That's if they don't have a pipeline, if there's no place for this stuff to get deployed, then there's no reason, like we got to get that set up right away. And so Zeke, I know Zeke, who was leading a lot of that, when we as we first spun up this working group a couple of years ago, is still very interested in working with us on that. And so he was not able to make it today, but will be here the same time next week. So I think we're going to spend a lot of time discussing how we can get more of that set up and unblock folks like yourself. I know that there's some pretty simple measures, like you just right now, I mean, to unblock translation processes for the Node.js website user in Crowden, you just need, that user just needs permissions. I think global permissions from Node. So that's something that's on my agenda to do as soon as possible. Hopefully today, but yeah, we'd like to get you unblocked and get that set up. But as far as deploy targets and that sort of thing, we need to maybe someone like Nick and you, Alexander, and Zeke and myself, other folks can set up a working group meeting with the owners of those deploy targets, the API docs and the website working group. I think would be a great one. So I think that's our next steps for getting that unblocked, is setting up that user and then making sure that we're on the same page with those groups who own those projects.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But man, I'm so excited that we're all here and we're finally discussing this, and yeah, it's good to get together and make this happen. Cool. So let's see. The next item on the agenda was update our guides, which was number 210. I think that was in tandem with the last one. I think we kind of discussed this in verbosely through the last discussion. It was sort of all tied in. We needed to update our contributing and getting started guides to facilitate a good place for people who are either interested in globalization, so like the INTL object, or localization, or setting up working like within this specific repository. So there's a few different places where people can get involved, but we need to make those guidelines clear as to how they can contribute and what they can do. So updating that, I think, is also pretty important, so people know how to contribute. But as Alexander said, yeah, we need to get the translation process unblocked. Cool. So I think, does anyone have thoughts on that? Nope. Okay. The next issue was the initial auditing of, oh, it's closed. Why are we even talking about it? I'm going to take that off the agenda. Okay, so we closed that last week. Doesn't need to be on here. The next one is issue number 34, which is Internationalization Working Group Meeting Time and Frequency. We sort of picked this time out of a hat between 4 people who were at the first working group meeting, so that this seemed to be a good time for us to meet. However, the other 4 people aren't here today, so but have said this was a generally good time. If you are sincerely interested in joining us on these, on like a weekly call, please chime in on this issue and tell us, either like this doesn't work for you, and if we get a couple of people saying, hey, this doesn't work for us, then we'll spin up a doodle and then try to get a new meeting time. But what I think we might actually have to do, based on the nature of time, global time, is have 2 different meetings. So one that's more at a workable time for people who are, say, in like Central European time or whatnot, and then or in like Asia or whatever, and then one that's over here as well. So we might have to maintain 2 different working group meeting times in order to maintain parity through all the people who are interested in working. But as far as the folks who are here, is this like for the next few weeks? Is this a good time, or is this not a good time?
It's a good time for me.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing.
Okay. All right. Awesome, cool. Well, I think great. I think that's good. It seems to be, obviously, it's in the hour of 10 a.m. on the west coast of the U.S. So that seems to be like more of like a generally good time for a lot of folks who are involved on this side. But yeah, I think what we'll probably end up doing is a reoccurring weekly meeting, just so we can keep in touch and keep on a good cadence at this time, and then a bi-monthly meeting where we do it in an hour that's more convenient for people on the other side of the world. So, okay, that sounds great. Unblock the translation process. This is exactly what we were just talking about a minute, Alexander. Beyond what we've already talked about, is there anything that you'd like to discuss concerning that today? No?
Yeah. So no. I have something to discuss.
Okay.
So yeah, I started looking on that. I think in previous year, and there's slow progress. But finally, we started making a call, starting discussing this, and I hope we will fix this soon. So yeah, firstly, I investigated maybe 3 or 4 hours in research about how we can connect Crowdin with Node.js org and Node.js documentation repositories easily for us and safely from security points, like to share permissions and other stuff. And the option that I posted in the issue is, I don't know, the most is a good fit for us, because it's not require any access to repository for someone, some specific person, for example, for me, and it's just creating a token that has limited permissions, and that's okay. And we also can start managing everything from Crowdin side. Also, I just want to explain how it looks now. So I am Zeke, and sorry, I don't remember who else has manager permissions in current crowdin project. You also have, yeah?
Yep, yep.
Okay, so if a few managers we already have, and yeah, that's great. But point one, Crowdin has a updated version of Crowdin, like Crowdin 2.0. It's like Crowdin for organizations. And I think if we uh, have have some progress on current project on old platform, and also I connected with Crowdin team. They are explained me how we can migrate current progress from old platform to new platform. It's possible. So I think we need to start thinking about using a new platform instead of old. It's the first point. Second point, we need to think in some way how we manage all this stuff, because we have I'm not sure how it works in Crowdin, but we can make a few managers for from our side, and then we need to assign in some way proofreaders for each language that we want to support. And I'm not sure in what way we will do this, because I also contributing to Gatsby.js. They also started their translation process, and they doing like in a way, if someone want to handle their language, please write something in comments of this issue. I wrote a comment, and now I am a manager of Russian language. But I think it's not very good way, because it's open source, but we need to manage good people in some way, because so we can assign to someone rights of proofreader, but then this guy missed somewhere, and it's not a good idea, because without proofread we can't publish any translation to live. So we need to start thinking about all processes, and I'm trying to keep in mind all this stuff, but it's really hard. So I'm trying to organize. The first question, if is about, do we want to migrate to a new platform of Crowdin, or we want to still use first version? It's the first question. And second question is about permissions, but it's related to the first question. If we deciding to go to the next version of platform, we need to use another token. It's a important point to know. So yeah, firstly we need to, I don't know, discuss with everyone, maybe with the most active guys that's already on call. Maybe we can create an issue where I provide the links, and each of us can test the new platform, decide benefits and other things. And if we decided to go with a new, okay, let's go with a new. If no, let's stay on the old. I think is the first point. Then when we connected to the platform, I need help from someone who understands how we are compiling API docs of Node.js, because I know how we compiling Node.js website, and I know how we compiling Node.js website new version, next version, I don't know, Node.js.dev. But I have no clue how we are building API documentation, because I can't find any scripts and anything. So I need someone who confident with that. But it's the next step. First step is decide which platform we use, and then provide the permissions. Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. Sorry for a long speech.
No, that was so great. That was so great. It was very concise and very poignant, and exactly what we need to discuss right now. And I was trying to take some good notes so that we can create some action items and issues around that. I think one thing that did spin out of that that would be great is if you wouldn't mind, Alexander, making an issue about testing out the new platform. That would be super good, just to get people who are interested and knowledgeable about that within the team to be able to discuss that and test it out together. Just to, as a springboard for us to talk more about that. That would be awesome.
Okay.
So if you wouldn't mind like opening an issue about that, that would be really great. Yeah, and as far as the other, the other things here, yeah, we do need, there has been slow progress. This is really great as far as like a sort of roadmap for how we're going to get that set up. I do know that, so on the other side, you were saying like we don't know how the API documentation gets compiled. There's definitely folks that I can reach out to. What I'd like to do is get the members of this group who'd like to discuss this at length on the call for next week. And then maybe we can, you can open that issue, we can talk about it, and then like reconvene within a week with like Zeke, who said he was going to be able to join next week. So, it'd be great to have you and Zeke and other folks on the call who we can, we can work through this with, as well as spinning out these issues. So I think that would be super great. And then, yeah, and then just taking down these notes here. Oh, the other big point, yes. So here's the thing, we don't, just as in line with what Alejandro was saying, we don't have like crowd-in best practices guides yet for translators, and that's also going to have to take in mind how crowd-in, like, I mean, that's obviously going to have to take in how crowd-in works and how you work as a proofreader or a manager or whatever. So there's some organizational problems that are inherent between how crowd-in works and then how localization groups will have to work accordingly to create like as streamlined a process for translation as possible, as easy a process for translation as possible, and as solid as you were saying. So like if we don't want to just have people like leave a comment and then they're a manager or whatever, we need to be able to figure that out and have those roles be defined. So, or the process to becoming those roles be defined so that within a contributing guide, so that, there's a step to be able to become that, probably after discussing it with localization groups or with, with the champions of the localization teams. Alejandro, you have your hand open, or your hand up?
Yes, I do have a question, a very specific one that you might have addressed before, I'm not sure. As of the documentation website, the APIs now are versioned, correct? And what I could find on crowding is not versioned at all. My question would be, if that's by design and we are not planning on translating every documentation version that we release.
Yeah, I think it's more about pragmatics right now. So I do know that there is definitely interest in translating like every version. However, I also know that within the interest or the current participation within this group, I think what might be pragmatic is to get all of our team structure and infrastructure set up to a basic MVP, because we're not even really out the door yet there, right? So we need to, I think we need to just choose, whatever the LTS version is or whatnot, that we've been translating, and just roll with that until all of this is, set up, and then slowly open the fire hose, I guess, more and more, slowly like introduce, more things to translate over time. So from a pragmatic perspective, I think it's most important to like translate, LTS, but then, beyond that, yeah, it would be ideal to target, all versions and then have those be available as well. But I think that's more up for discussion over time.
That's great. So what we're currently seeing on crowding is currently master, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm not sure about that, because as I understand, as everything that we see on crowding is it was synced a long time ago, and it's I don't know, maybe a year ago synced with master, but it's not updated.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. Sorry, Alejandro. So like it should be, but the maintainership of the working group has been such that we haven't pulled we haven't been keeping it current over that period of time. So like is that in line with what you're saying, Alexander?
Yeah. And also, sorry, I just want to give you some information about how crowding works. In crowding, you can set up first point, when we are synced with our repository, we synced all, we can configure in any different ways. We can sync in one project different branches and set up some specific versions for each branch, and we can configure all of that. Secondly, we can set up priorities for translations because, for example, we have some LTS version, but someone started from Node.js 6.0, for example, and we need to force these translators to not waste time. And for that, we can use priorities. And all of that can be handled from crowd side. So I think, yeah, that's all what I have.
No, that's great. That's great. I think this is something that, yeah, we obviously don't want people to waste time, and so this that's on the internationalization working group and maintainership here to keep up to date. So yeah, I'm just glad. It's like it's almost painful to recognize that, but then also know that yeah, we need to keep this updated so that people are updated and prioritized, as you said, so people are updating the right thing at the right time. Okay, are there any more thoughts on that, or concerns or questions about that?
No, just that's a great point that Alexander mentioned, and it would be great to hear feedback from either the team or you, Ben, for when those documents in crowding had been updated, so that we can start, delegating some parts of the documentation and whatnot.
Absolutely. I think that is just that's going to be messaging best practices. So like if we, as we discussed before, if we set up Slack or Slack and Twitter, I would suppose might be a good place to say, hey, we pulled the lit, like, I mean, or like obviously GitHub as well, if people are following along there. But for translators, and getting that messaging out to translators, there's a little bit more abstraction, because translators are checking Crowdin, and maybe there's ways to message that obviously across the group within Crowdin as well. That's probably more central than this too. So like I think if we make sure that we have a communication blast to the translators every time we pull latest docs and that kind of stuff, that would be ideal. Then we can stay up to date. But just setting up the communication pipeline there will be, I think, is exactly what we should be doing. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. Any other thoughts on this topic? Okay. So we had a couple other things here. One was publishing an NPM module. I don't think we're quite, with like 4 minutes left, we don't really need to talk about that in earnest today, as we will probably do it next week when we have, we're talking about unblocking the translation process and getting that set up with, the API documentation and things like that. Alejandro, did you want to say something? Or, I mean, not Alejandro, I'm sorry, Alexander. Sorry, two A's. I don't know if Alexander had any thoughts on that before we move on or anything, but no. Okay.
No, not now.
Great. Okay, cool. Then the other thing is creating a crowd and glossary. With the couple minutes that we have here, I think we'll just punt that to the next, or we'll go to the next thing that is not an issue, but needs to be an issue that I just wanted to throw out there. So crowd and glossary, we need to create a glossary of sort of reserved words and things that may get lost as we're translating. That's the general idea, if anybody needed to know about that. So translators have a reference sheet so that they can say like, oh, oh, don't translate that, or then there's also the fuzzy line between sometimes certain idioms, though they are common in English, maybe don't translate well at all, like in another language. So that's always going to be a constant translation problem to work through is, hey, I know everybody in English understands like this phrase this way, but we're going to have to, we got to capture those kind of things like in other languages so that we don't, we don't enforce that they say something.
So I just threw in the link to the remark preset lint node. So that's what's used for all the markdown docs for English as well. So a lot of things like preferred terminology. So like no possessive Node.js, and using capitalized Node.js throughout documentation. So we do have some rules already on the English side for these things. And that's used both on the website plus the actual Node core repo.
Awesome, perfect. That's great. Thanks for sharing, Nick. Yeah, that's definitely a great thing to reference right now regarding that. Cool. Well, we just have about a minute and a half here left, so I just wanted to say, wanted to go over this last thing that's not an issue. I need to make this an issue. So a lot of what we talked about, so far has been regarding localization and translating, our text into various languages. The other is setting up the infrastructure, and that's obviously number one. Like, what do we have without an infrastructure? Setting up the infrastructure to be able to deploy our localized, documentation and things like that. And then the other point that we need to, we'll probably discuss more next time Stephen is here, Stephen Loomis, is how do we onboard folks who are more interested on the side of maintaining the INTL object and how we internationalize things within Node itself. So that's definitely something that various people are interested in and is under the purview of the Internationalization Working Group in Node.js. These two things, these two disciplines, seem relatively different, but they are mutually supportive, kind of like how languages evolve. So, how there might be a delegate and a invited expert relationship within, like a language standards organization is kind of how to think about that. The work we do supports the internationalization of Node and JavaScript. And then, that helps us understand how to create a symbiotic relationship between how we're translating and how it's used, and how we're using the INTL object and things like that. So we're definitely interested in evolving that conversation and how we can get people more interested in helping out the evolution of that in Node as well. And Stephen can probably help us more with that next week. We are at time. Did anybody have any last thoughts on that particular issue or anything that they'd like to discuss today?
Nope. I think I know things to do until next Friday. So see you later. And I switching to another call. Thank you guys. Nice to meet you. See you.
You too, Alexander. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, bye. Thanks, Alejandro. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Tiago, for all joining, and excited for next week. Same time, same place, and hopefully we'll see you there.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.